Um, Next, we look at iterating. So I ask myself, is the cave unwelcoming and cold? Uh, I guess so. I mean, it's dark. It's not a nice place, but we'll see. I'm not particularly satisfied with the results. Um, Next, I'm looking at, does it hint at an urban space? So between the hallway with the objects and then the larger cavern with the kind of urban objects, and then something like a ladder down into a large space with fireplace and a chair. I think we're pretty good. I felt pretty confident that design had laid out you know something that was like an urban living space, but not really, not too much. Um, was the den scene interesting, um, or rather, was it uncomfortable? Somewhat. It's hard for me to tell without the art assets being in there, and that's just something I have to work with and abstract and say, okay, I'm going to imagine a chair here and imagine a fireplace there. Given that, does this whole space feel uncomfortable? Um, and is the figure in the chair familiar and unfriendly? Um, I mean, if Oscar walks by and sees a cigarette light up, I guess that's unfriendly, but it still feels a little bit too subtle. I don't know if that's enough to work with. So I went back and looked at, how we can. Um, well, actually, I think the first thing I did was I looked at upside. So I talked a little bit about this already. Um, you know, Once I put in these elements, I didn't really ask questions. Like I actually executed all this stuff first. Um, I said, "How does it look?" And then I played through and I tried to observe little things that might help that I might want to actually put in if they're really easy, or take notes of. Not necessarily spend the extra time to put in little details. Those are, we just don't know if those are going to change, and it's not really a productive use of our time. But taking note, where I already talked about me being very poor at lighting, I accidentally made the living room look kind of haunted, which was neat. Um, Making it important to note that something else I realized was when this living room was too dark, it didn't feel unwelcoming. That if it's just dark, I have no idea how big the space is. It may as well be a hallway, so I needed to make sure I was lighting um, some of the larger spaces near the ceiling of the living room. And that the hinting of the happier past thing, I think, was very important for me to realize how we could be putting that into game periodically. So looking at some other upside before I went and made any changes, there's actually a few bumps here that are supposed to imitate some stairs, and that got me on a very important train of thought. That to me, when I would avoid confrontation with my parents, I think this is the case for many children. It's all about um, discretion and trying to be inconspicuous, and you're trying to sneak down and sneak by, and you just want to get out of the house and go to school before you get yelled at about not doing your homework or that disagreement you had last night. So when I put in stairs here, stairs to me are something that, well, depends on what age of place you lived in when you were younger, but they can creak a lot. So here I thought, well, hey, I said to Ankit, maybe she walks more slowly when she's on stairs because she's trying to be quiet. Um, and then that's where we had this very healthy creative exchange where Ankit said, wouldn't it make sense that if this is all building up to the mother, that maybe sounds coming from the den are what would cause Oscar to slow down. So, we're walking along and then we hear, the flick of a lighter, even really far away, but it sounds like it's close to us. And that's a very interesting way to allude to this being a small apartment because, a single mother's not going to own a huge space. That's just how Oscar's picturing it, as kind of dark and intimidating. So if the sound is very near you, we can start to build that up, and that's where the player, feels feedback from the game, feels interaction, and the game can still be engaging without necessarily having, explosions or combo systems or anything like that. But the gameplay really should be supporting whatever feeling you want in a given scene. So moving on, it's important to be able to extrapolate that we just want to lay out our intent, build it out as bare bones as possible. This really only took me like a day, of blocking everything out, maybe another half day of looking at some upside, discussing it with a couple other people to say, how is this feeling to you? And to know that specific details, each section could really be cut out and expanded or changed into something else. But as long as I'm covering all of my intentions, that should be generating all the information I need. In the case that we build it and we don't like it, that's one of two things. We're either where are we here? We're either fulfilling the intent, and that's great, but the intent itself needs to change. So Chris didn't quite give instructions properly, and that's something she needs to learn at. Every creative director gets better at what they do, and giving the intent is not easy. Or the intent is good, and we have to look at our execution again. But we don't have to swim around and flail around and say, why isn't this what we want? Those are really the only two possibilities for the most part. But yeah, going back to process. At that point, once we've iterated, made any changes, then it's up for review, and this is really just a first pass on, is this telling the story correctly, and how does it feel? And that specifically, if you're a designer, so levels, gameplay, that's what you're laying out here, just like I did. You want to run this by Art and Sound as soon as you can, because they'll have a lot of input that's going to be very affecting of whether or not you can tell the story and make it feel a certain way. That gameplay, what I'm trying to emphasize, is only a small part. Depending on your genre, but in this case, it's only a small part of how we're trying to create the specific experience. So when I showed it to Ankit, he mentioned grid lighting in the living room would be really good. That we don't know where the light's necessarily coming from, but if they were kind of like barred, like a window, so you'd see like a little cross in the light, and if we splash that light across the objects, so the giraffe here would have a bunch of squares on it from light coming from a window, or like prison bars, something like that. That would enhance that kind of creepy, it's not so happy here anymore look, while staying in that kind of darker tone that definitely describes the cave. I discussed with Tessa, what the sounds could be coming from the den. That's where we thought of, the lighter and other little noises we could hear, and just getting her feedback on what she thought of mechanically, how that would come across, and yeah, it seemed like we got the thumbs up. So I'm hoping to put that in pretty soon and see how it feels. So lastly, we're setting goals. Meet the goal. Look at your work and say, did we meet the goal? Yes, then set the goal differently if it doesn't feel good. Or, did we meet the goal? No, then go back and try and do something that will help you meet the goal, either by reviewing, your sources, why you're doing it, or, potentially talking with the creative director. So something I'm hopefully alluding to, especially in those last couple slides, the idea that, it's a team of designers. Just because you're the one laying out the level and placing objects doesn't necessarily mean you're the only designer. That when it comes to executing your discipline to fulfill the intent, which in this, we're trying to make this feel cold, trying to make it feel unwelcoming, that art, sound all have to think about that intent. You're not just populating the level in most cases. For a lot of you, especially like Ankit, Tessa, you're looking at why this is the way it is, and how your work can best serve to make that come across. All right, so this has hopefully been a good introduction to process. I'll definitely be taking some feedback on if this was a good format. Next up, I'll do the forest level, and hopefully that will be a little bit clearer. The level's less dark, so you'll be able to see what's going on, but it's also more gameplay focused. And given that most of us are still pulling mostly from player experiences, our experiences we've had as a player, gameplay focus is much easier to relate to. So I'll see you guys in that video.